Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's event, Chicago Zine Culture from the first Queer Zine Fest to now. I'm Molly Szymanski, Digital Archivist at the Art Institute of Chicago Archives and co-chair of the Chicago Collections Consortium Programming Committee. For those of you that are new to Chicago Collections, who's the organizer of this event, it's a consortium of museums, libraries, and cultural heritage organizations working together for the preservation, promotion, and sharing of Chicago's history and culture. One of the most important ways CCC does this is through selections of members' archival collections that are shared via the free and open access platform Explore Chicago Collections, and through public programs like this one. You can join the mailing list or follow Chicago Collections on social media for updates and information about future programs. I'd also like to acknowledge the Terra Foundation for American Art for their generous support. This event is being presented as part of Art Design Chicago Now, an initiative funded by the Terra Foundation that amplifies the voices of Chicago's diverse creatives, past and present, and explores the essential role they play in shaping the now. You can visit their website or social media for updates on upcoming events in this series. Your program this evening will have two hosts. You've already met me, and next you'll hear from my co-host, April Sheridan, who will briefly give you a glimpse at some archival materials while providing some important grounding and historical context for our program. Then we'll transition to the main event, which will be a roundtable discussion between these 5 amazing, talented individuals listed on the right side of the screen. They are artists, zine makers, and Zine Fest organizers gathered to have a conversation with each other around the past, present, and future of Chicago's zine community. You'll get to know each of them more when they introduce themselves later on. Finally, I'll rejoin you towards the end as we hope to have an opportunity to answer questions submitted by the audience. So if at any time during tonight's program you have a question for our participants, please use the Q&A feature located on the bottom of your screen. As I mentioned, a wide variety of archival materials are held at CCC member organizations. If you're interested specifically in the topic of zines, highlighted on the screen are a few of the related member collections at DePaul University, University of Chicago, and the School of the Art Institute of Chicago Flaxman Library. And now I'll pass it off to my co-host April to share some materials from one of these collections, including some from Spew, the first Queer Zine Fest, which serves as the inspiration and jumping off point for tonight's roundtable. April?
The Joan Flash Artist Book Collection includes over 11,500 pieces of art that all fall under the umbrella of artist publications. And those items range from zines to limited edition sculptural works. You can see they include sound recordings and video recordings as well. And of those 11,500 pieces, about 2,500 of them are categorized as zines. Many of those are queer zines. We also have a lot from the Riot Girl era, and there are a number of zines from the international male art periodical community that was particularly active in the 1970s. And the rest, I would say, fall into categories of really interesting topics, including Perzines or diaristic zines, protest, informational how-to zines, and they come in many different shapes and forms. You can wear some of them. Some of them are unexpected. And all of them are important. So here we're particularly interested in examining the self-publishing methods that artists use in order to bypass institutionalized systems such as galleries and publishing companies, because no zine was ever on the New York Times bestseller list. But 2 important factors in categorizing zines are the low cost and ease of production and more open methods of distribution. And this allows all of us a great chance at encountering the human story. As for the archives of the special collections, we have several: Goat Island Performance Group, Three Walls Gallery, Tony's Wicker Archives, and about 20 years ago, we acquired 282 linear feet of the Randolph Street Gallery archives. And although it remains only partially processed, we have scanned a lot of it, and our digital media and preservation librarian, Carolyn Faber, has digitized all of the video parts of that. That collection also features photographs, event calendars, posters, financial records, other materials documenting the nearly 20-year history from 1979 to 1998 of an important Chicago cooperative and artist-run gallery and performance space with a particular interest in the social and political issues of its time and a deep commitment to community engagement. Randolph Street Gallery was a critical venue for new forms of artistic expression and left a lasting impact both locally and globally. One event that stands out from that time was part of a month-long celebration of queer art and performance events called In Through the Outdoor. And on May 25th, 1991, Randolph Street Gallery hosted the first ever recorded Queer Zine Fest. It was called Spew, the Homographic Convergence. And I'm quoting from some of the promotional materials on the screen now. This first ever queer zine convention will bring editors and representatives to Randolph Street Gallery from cities across the country and Canada in a forum for the homocore scene. In attendance will be representatives from internationally distributed zines, including Thing, Bimbox, and Homoture. So we have some of these original pieces from that time that were on the tables there. There are currently over 100 Xeroxed or cheaply offset printed queer zine publications in existence. This is the materials continuing, with a readership that extends beyond the underground to the more adventurous, experimental mainstream. Also featured at that convention, nonstop queer video from Wigstock to the Yo-Yo Girls, and including the new Bruce LaBruce epic, No Skin Off My Ass. Ongoing performances, readings, and they say, no workshops, no panels, and no sleep. The festival had stories that lived on long after the weekend was over. One included the unfortunate stabbing of the organizer Steve Lafreniere by white supremacists following a performance by Vaginal Davis outside of the Hot House, which was a club in Chicago at that time. About the stabbing, Vaginal Davis wrote, "There was so much hope and optimism in the air that evening, and then something tragic happens and brings in a mist of darkness. That's why one can never let down their guard and become complacent. You must be vigilant at all times." If we consider the history of the zine, we can begin to understand it as an essential mode of community building. When we look at zines themselves, we tend to associate them with a punk rock aesthetic, simple DIY design, black and white photographs, staples, ransom note style page layouts. This one even has a safety pin on it. And while it was definitely used in that community beginning in the 1970s and forward, similar modes of distribution and social function started way back in the 1940s in the science fiction culture. And that's when the term zine was actually coined, goes that far back. And I like to say that it actually began with trolls. There were no online forums, but a large and voracious readership of science fiction. Science fiction magazine editors grew sick of people writing in to complain about the improbabilities of the stories they published. So they started publishing the commentator and the writer's home addresses, thereby allowing the fans to connect in their own way and on their own time. There was no other place for people to talk about this stuff other than on paper. So letters grew into pamphlets, thus the fanzine. Science fiction was a very marginalized form of writing at the time. One reason is because it presented critical ideas about mainstream society. During that same era, another community that shared lots of postal networks of distribution were queer communities sharing sexual imagery. Their distribution networks are a little bit better documented because it was also illegal at the time. Though their topics were different, these all share a functionality: low-cost communication in a specific community, and all are complaints against mass-produced, mainstream, and sometimes against heteronormative culture. And the ability to communicate with people who are interested in the same things and to feel like you are part of a support system is especially important between groups which are not represented in popular culture and undervalued in cultural conversation. I believe that Spew set the scene for much of the more contemporary activity in the zine community in Chicago. With so many participant-organized festivals like ZINEMercado, Chicago Zine Fest, Cake, Midwest Perzine Fest, and independent collections like the Read Write Library, it wasn't long before academic institutions like this one and DePaul and the University of Chicago would catch on in trying to capture that activity. But Chicago is also home to an essential active nexus for zine distribution, and that's Quimby's over on North Avenue. All of these fests and collections flourish today, and we'll hear more about them tonight. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation with some of the most important people involved in the scene today. So let's begin. Each of our participants will introduce themselves, and we're going to begin tonight with the amazing Julia Arredondo.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. I saw a bunch of y'all in the participants area. It's nice to see all of y'all. Julie, Ed, Pa, nice to see y'all. My name is Julia Arredondo, and I run Vice Versa Press, Curandera Press, along with a whole collection of small businesses. I consider small business a creative practice of mine, and zines is how I got started in that. So thanks for having me. Oscar, you're up next.
Hey, how's it going? So my name is Oscar Arriola, and I'm a staff member of the Chicago Public Library. I've collected and enjoyed zines since the early 90s, and I'm just super happy just to be part of that community, and just enjoy seeing what people create over the years. I'm one of the co-founders of ZINEMercado, which is a smaller zine fest here in Chicago, and also co-founder of Fotomercado, which is a photography-based zine fest that's been held the past several years at the Ace Hotel. And next is Osa.
Hi, my name's Osa Atoe, and I made the zine Shotgun Seamstress from 2006 to 2015. It's pretty much the only zine I ever made, but it lasted for a while. Right now, I'm mostly making pottery, and thanks for having me.
Hello, my name is Jonas Cannon. I've been making zines for quite a while now. Yeah, I don't know how long, since high school, pretty much on again and off again. Made a lot of zines, like Cheer the F Up, Fixer Eraser, and some of the zines you see right on the screen now. And oh, and I also organized a zine fest here in Chicago called the Midwest Perzine Fest. Well, it was virtual this year, but you know, we're based in Chicago in general. So, and next up, I guess, will be Liz.
Hi, everybody. My name is Liz Mason. I'm really happy to be here. I've been making and reading zines since the 90s, and I've been working at Quimby's bookstore since 2001, and I'm the manager there now. So why don't we go ahead and get this roundtable started? And with the first question, we'll just start with what is a zine to each of us, and as a visual art form, how is it unique and what drew us to it? I guess I'll just throw out the short answer that I always give when I'm just trying to like zoom through, you know, like when someone goes, what's a zine? My short answer is I just say it's an independently published periodical. And then there's the longer answer too. But does anybody else want to jump in on what is a zine to you?
Sure. Well, to me, a zine is just anything that's self-published, small run, generally handmade, or even professionally printed, but still, it's one person's vision, and it's usually under maybe 100 copies. So yeah, that's what I feel is a zine. Just it could be obviously any topic, Perzine, writings, photography, artwork. And that's the thing I love about it too, is that it's anything you want it to be. There's no really hard, fast rules of the right way to do it.
I think I would probably just say that it's a independently published work with a extremely limited print run. Just because I don't know of any zines that have, right off the bat had millions and millions of copies out there, or even hundreds of thousands. It's a pretty low print run. So I would probably, those are the only two things I could say define a zine.
Yeah, I also think for me, zines exist without an editor. So zines, in my opinion, are very much made by the writer. Maybe there's a designer involved, but for the most part, it's a totally unedited publication, independently produced publication.
I also, sometimes I'll, like if I am really putting the nuance on it, sometimes I'll add that, it doesn't have a lot of advertising and might not be really glossy too.
Yeah. For me, like the importance of it being kind of bare bones and DIY gives meaning to it. I mean, it's hard to say these days because I've seen so many different things called zines, from things that look like magazines, like full color, several, like kind of art book, screen printed. So, I mean, they really literally can be anything, but the ones that feel the most meaningful to me are the ones that I can see were kind of like produced on some type of like budget or under some sort of limitation.
Yes.
Agreed.
Yeah, I picked up a funny little zine at the Milwaukee Zine Fest years ago, and all it was pieces of fabric that were sewn together. They were maybe about 3 inches tall, and there was no text, no title, and there was like 5 pages to it, but it was just different pieces of fabric. And just that they called it a zine, I thought was really funny. It was 50 cents, and I accepted that. I'm like, sure, this is a zine. It's, it's somebody's vision, somebody put it together, and it presents some sort of visual imagery. So yeah, there's really no rules to it.
But I definitely think there's like a tradition of zines. Like also when you're talking about like DIY, I'm thinking of like photocopied black and white, right? But things have definitely changed. I mean, I feel like I've seen them change. I don't know if they've always been like art book oriented, but I feel like art books have also entered the zine sphere in a really big way and have sort of changed the dynamic of what a zine is traditionally considered.
I agree with that, definitely. The zines, when I first started working at Quimby's and people would consign their zines, it was black and white stapled, photocopied, and maybe it had progressed from a zine to being a magazine, and maybe it was perfect bound, like a magazine or like a paperback book. But now we're still getting the photocopied stuff, but also getting the artist booklets that are more expensive, glossier paper, done with very original type of interesting screen printing methods, and definitely into artist book territory, or artist booklet territory, I guess. What was it that drew you guys to zines?
I think for me, getting into zines back in the 90s, I think apart from the, angstiness of it, I think it was just the lack of, I guess you could say lack of editing. Well, just just how raw it felt, you know, that the person writing it just put the pure emotion in it without filter. And that's something that appealed to me quite a bit, is just reading that raw emotion and having it resonate. And yeah, just feeling really close to the material and to the person that wrote it, just because it was so like unfiltered, unedited, just a strong voice that I could almost hear.
I started documenting graffiti in the late 80s, early 90s. And especially at the time, there wasn't much literature or books about graffiti. So just coming across zines by people like Mike Giant, who was New Mexico and San Francisco based graffiti artist, skateboarder and tattooer. He started making these really funny zines that he posted online in the early days of the internet. And those are some of my first exposures to graffiti zines. And then I'd meet writers out here in Chicago who would make their own zines and just pass them out. I joined the staff of Chicago Rock's hip hop magazine, and that was a very cut and paste affair too. So all of that kind of merged together and kind of like led me into the zine world. And that's also when I came across Quimby's bookstore in '93, and just seeing that there was a whole world out there of all these publications that were from around the country.
So I was involved in the punk scene growing up, but I never felt like I had a voice because I didn't know enough cool people to start a band with. You know, that was always my dream, but I didn't have the community to start a band. And so I got into zines because it helped me express my voice in the subculture. That was like the way that was accessible for me as like a lone wolf, right? Like I didn't feel comfortable performing on my own, but I could make zines and communicate with my peers. And so that's how I started getting into it, was I wanted to cultivate that community.
I relate to what Julie's saying. For me, it was just about wanting to participate in punk culture, and like there was always like two options: start a band or write a zine. And I was like, that's it. And I loved punk so much, and like I just took it at the letter. You know, people said that those were the things that you do to like participate, so I just did them. And I also well, Riot Girl was like a big the kind of way that I found out about zines. And so like everything about that movement and subculture was just so, I mean, attractive to me, like politically, visually, the bands. And so I saw zines as like part of that subculture. And I actually missed most of that. But the zines that really helped were like the zines that kind of came right after that, which was a lot of like POC zines that were talking about their experience like within Riot Girl. And so that's where I kind of felt like I found my niche, like writing about feminism and like queerness and all the, and like Riot Girl, but from like a people of color perspective. So yeah, it was basically just wanting to participate in punk, and those being like one of the few avenues that you're like given to participate, and just kind of like doing it, you know?
One of the questions that that kind of came up when we were planning out this roundtable was, how did each of us start creating zines and participating in Zine Fest? So we kind of talked about how each of us got into making zines a little bit, but you know, all of us have some kind of experience with tabling or organizing Zine Fests. So should we talk about that maybe? Does anybody want to go first?
I just wanted to meet like cuties, honestly. Like I've always been like having a ton of crushes. And when I was reading the material about Spew, like the historical accounts of Spew, one of the, like, I loved the fact that there were no boring panels, like no sleep. Cruising was totally going to be a part of the event. And I would totally go to Zine Fest so I could like meet cute people and possibly have sex and do drugs. And I miss that. Like, I feel like that's not really the zine culture that's happening now, but that's definitely why I got into it.
I think for me it was because I went to the first Chicago Zine Fest. That was the first Zine Fest I had ever gone to. And for me, it was just just incredible. It just gave me this incredible burst of inspiration. Just seeing so many people there, just with this diverse amount of subject matters, and just seeing everyone just put their heart and soul into these works, and I was just kind of blown away. For a little while, I had been mostly just in the I don't know, writing community, or just amongst other people that identified as writers as opposed to zinesters, and there just wasn't the same. It was all too cynical for me. There wasn't the same sort of just camaraderie and just loving the art in itself, instead of just thinking in terms of who's the best writer in the room. And yeah, from that Zine Fest on, I just have been going strong with making zines. It was just so inspiring, and still every Zine Fest that I'm able to attend, it always just gives me a rush, and I just want to make a new zine. So.
So again, for me, zines were like part of this like total culture. It wasn't even about so much like being into zines. It was just like you went to like the house show, you went to the vegan potluck, you went to Zine Fest. I just lived in a town that had one at the time, like in the early 2000s in Portland, Oregon. And like, so it was just kind of something that was part of the overall experience. And for years, I just read zines. I didn't write a zine for a while. Like I knew about zines for probably like 5 to 10 years before I ever wrote one. So it was just kind of a thing that was around and part of like going to shows and being like into punk and DIY culture.
And my first exposure to it was there was a zine fest at DePaul University here in Chicago, and probably in the mid-90s. And again, everything was brand new to me. So it was just interesting just to see what people were making. I think there was a lot more punk and political zines, not as much visual culture, which is more what I'm like attracted to. But it was still fun to check out and see what they had. And then Milwaukee started a Zine Fest a lot later. We trekked all the way up there to check out their fests. And that's how Chicago Zine Fest started. People like Neil Bordeaux and Leslie said, why are we traveling up to Milwaukee and we don't even have one in Chicago? So they started the Chicago Zine Fest. Here are some other volunteers. So from there on, it's just been, I think, a whole avalanche or zine fests around the country. Like it rapidly grew, and it's evolved into like the art book fairs in LA, New York, and Chicago, which is a whole other subset of zines and art books. So yeah, I'm really happy that it's grown and people are getting involved with that and expanding the whole idea of what you could do with zines.
I remember one of the first zine fests I went to was in, I don't know, 96 or 97 or something. And I had just made the first zine that I had ever made after reading them for years. And it was Cul-de-sac, was the first zine that I did. And my friend and I that I did the zine with, we went to a zine fest in Bowling Green, Ohio. And I don't even remember the name of it. It was like, it was whatever the Allied Media Conference was before it was that, like when they called it like the, Underground Press Conference or whatever. And you didn't have to apply for a table. You just said, you just signed up somehow. Maybe we sent an email or, the internet wasn't as like, as friendly as to form fill out friendly, whatever. And you just kind of said, I'll go and show up. And there were maybe like 50 people tabling. And I remember like going to like a workshop, and I was enthralled by the fact that someone was, talking about their zine or whatever, and they were it was like a Perzine, but like talking, and they were like, and then I, bought some herbs by the side of the road for my medical problems, and then I spent some time in an institution, and then I, and then a conversation followed, and I was like, this is absolutely enthralling. Like I am in this narrative to win here. So.
yeah, going to Zine Fests allowed me a destination, like allowed me to travel. Like I would print my maps out ahead of time because I didn't have access to the internet all the time. It's so wild to think, about things only maybe 7 years ago. I would print all my maps out and go to these new cities and like figure out my way around the city, sleep on someone's couch, and then this was all within zine culture. And it was a really good place for me to land as like a young transient person.
Oh, so you were talking about how you read zines for years before you made one, and that really resonated with me. And I'm wondering, what did you all learn from reading zines that carried into your zine making practice? So like for me, I learned about, because my first zine reading experiences were Maximum Rock and Roll. My parents were older, so I was always grounded. And so I was in my room reading Maximum Rock and Roll and sending like $1 through the mail for stickers or zines or a 7-inch or something. And that's how reading that and like Chunklet and maybe like Bunny Hop and maybe Chick Factor. Like that's how I learned how to do design for zines. So I'm wondering, like, were there any zines that you all read that, kind of influenced how you make zines?
Well, to be quite honest, full disclosure, before I was into zines, I was like I was reading like Spin. And like, I remember this magazine from the 90s called Raygun. And I mean, we used to read Rolling Stone interviews. So like before I was into punk and I was just into like alternative and like even like when I was into rap, I would read the source. So like I was always just kind of like a music interview reading type of person. And then I think zines just kind of gave it a little bit more of just like this like extra personal touch. Just like the handmade cut and paste was like kind of what I took from like zines. And then I think my zine was like largely a reaction to reading a lot of Perzines because like Right Girl and like the zines that came after were like so personal. I kind of wanted to go back to like my like interview, like music nerd, like roots. And that's kind of what Shotgun Seamstress was. So it was kind of like about identity and about my experience, but through interviewing other people and like nerding out about bands and stuff.
Yeah, my experience, I was the same way. I was reading zines for years before I decided to make one. I was always stockpiling images and thinking, I'm gonna make a zine someday. One magazine that I thought was really influential for me was Giant Robot, based in LA. It's an Asian American magazine by Eric Nakamura. And one thing I really loved was that he always highlighted his favorite books and zines on one page in each issue. I think it's called his bookshelf or book corner. And just looking through that and finding things to order or things I'd never heard of was like really amazing. So when I first made my first zine, I went up to Eric. I met him at a talk in Chicago and I just gave him a copy of it. And he's like, oh, I'll put it in my magazine. I was like, yeah, whatever. And then a few months later, it actually came out in that page. And I was really geeked out because to me, that was like winning the Nobel Prize of zines. Like, oh, he reviewed my zine in his magazine. And, and this is like where I find all my favorite things to read. So yeah, early magazine culture like Giant Robot, yeah, and Spin. Yeah, all those are really fun to read.
I was introduced to zines by way of, well, basically I was hanging out with a bunch of friends, and one of my friends at one point in the evening just took a big box full of zines and just put it in, in the middle of all of us, and we just started reading. And I didn't know what a zine was before that, but by the end of it, I wanted to make one. However, I think a lot of the zines that we read were kind of local. And if any of them weren't, like there could have been an issue or two of like Comic Bus or something, but I wouldn't have known because I just thought that they were made by people in our town. And that's kind of what I loved about it too, because it was so, I found that I wasn't really even paying that much attention to who wrote it as much as just what they were writing. And it's this weird dynamic of feeling really close to the person, but so distant that I'm not like, oh, who is this? I have to get in contact with this person, because like my mind still wasn't even thinking at that level. My mind still had that sort of detachment, almost like, you know, any sort of adoration for a celebrity, you know, where I feel so removed from them because the work feels so close to me, if that makes sense. But yeah, that was kind of my experience. And then things were different when I got back into zines much later. But yeah.
I know I'm from a small town in South Texas. And so I would go to Barnes and Noble. Like Barnes and Noble was so cool because it just opened up, and Guitar Center had just opened up in my town. And so I'd get like Mojo magazine from Guitar Center, and then I go to Barnes and Noble and get Punk Planet. And like Punk Planet was super, super cool. There was another Clamor. I think Clamor blew my mind. And so after I saw these like non-glossy magazines, it really shifted my perspective on what reading material could look like. And simultaneously, like Asian Man Records in California would put out these like mail order brochures, and the mail order brochures allowed, like they had a zine quality, but they also allowed me to purchase and shop, and I love to shop. So that was sort of my foray into independent publishing.
Yeah, Tower Records was also another source of just everything. Like I'd never seen so many graffiti zines in my life until Tower opened in Chicago. And every genre or culture had its own section there, and it was just insane. The graffiti section would have stickers by different local writers stuck where the magazines were along the shelves. So you could even see like who just got into town, and you know, just like people passing through the city, and like, oh, this person's sticker's up here. So yeah, I was in love with Tower. I was really happy that it existed, and I was sad that it went out of business too.
That is so weird to me to remember back and think that zines were actually at Tower Records, because the equivalent now is if, I don't know, zines were at like a Best Buy and they were just chilling there next to the Blu-rays.
Well, the amazing thing about Tower is because since I worked on a Chicago hip hop magazine called Chicago Rocks, Tower would take pretty much any magazine and you'd have to send them all to California, and they would divide it by all the stores in the country and even Japan. So if you sent them 100 copies, they would send, you know, 8 copies to every store. So you were guaranteed distribution like all over the country and then some other places as well too, which was pretty amazing. Like there's really no other way to do that unless you went through like a zine distro or something. Mm-hmm. But the reach that that store had by doing it that way was like pretty incredible.
Jonas, you said something that really resonated with me, and you said something like reading zines and having initially like this admiration, like, oh, this person is a celebrity, and I thought about that, and then I thought, well, but what I know about you is you collaborate with a lot of people. So there's something about making zines that, you know, like initially you're like, oh, this person, and then you just kind of team up with them because you like their work. And I feel like that is something that to me feels very particular to the world of zines, like that sort of breaks down the borders between like I really admire you. It's like, I want to collaborate with you, you know? And so I'm wondering, you know, is that something that you think is particular to zines, or, you know, or do you guys have thoughts about that?
I would say probably music is that way too. But I really appreciate that with zines, you know, that sort of process of, I mean, the people that I've collaborated with, they've all been people whose own zines have touched me pretty deeply. And, you know, feeling that bond and being able to make a zine that, you know, where we're sharing our own individual thoughts, and not necessarily having a direct communication with each other, although I've done that kind of zine too, but sharing different thoughts that still kind of come together and meld, you know, where you're kind of bonding, even if you're not, you know, talking to each other directly. And I dig that. Even when I've had the the compilation zines where it might be 10, 15 people writing, just each individual zinester, just connecting with and having this one document where we all connect with each other. Yeah, I feel that's incredible, and for me at least, unique to zines.
Yeah, my friends Eric Von Haynes and Peter Miller-Bergman, one's looking in Chicago and the other one's in Denver. They've been putting out a zine. It's a very elaborate zine called Raw Fury. They're both printmakers, so they put a lot of effort into doing like letterpress on the cover, but they invite different artists to submit articles, zine reviews, and it's a huge collaboration because they put out maybe 6 issues already. Like this is one of the issues over here, and it's like my friend Shama Scandal, who I do ZINEMercado with, like he did their portraits for the issue in his style, and then there's just a lot of different ways of printing. They use offset printing, screen printing, they insert posters in the zine. So they try to hit upon like every possible way of printing something and putting it all in this one, even like round the corners, just to give it another touch too. So to me, this is such a great collaboration with like all these artists and the 2 editors of the magazine too.
Here's a question. So I once asked the founder of Quimby, Stephen Simbersky, I said, I have such a weird relationship with capitalism, like zines, we think of something as being sort of like, this punk rock thing that's anti the man and money is the man. But also I work for a bookstore that is known for selling anti-capitalist stuff, but we take money for the stuff, and like I was never able to really reconcile the thoughts about that. And he said, well, you're not taking advantage of anyone. You're, if this is something that people want, they're okay with giving you, So my question to all of you are, do you have thoughts about that? Have you been able to reconcile that, or does, or maybe you're like, what, I put a lot of work into this and I paid to print it, and I definitely, like, I'm curious how you guys feel about that.
I mean, I personally feel like I can't say very much to communism. I mean, especially since my iPhone is like right next to me. I know at Zine Fest, I always say if someone comes to my table and we have a good conversation, they would probably, if they asked for any of my zines for free, I would probably give it to them. And as it is, if on the rare occasion that there's a Zine Fest I'm at and someone says, oh, I love your zine, but I don't have any money on me right now, sorry, I usually just give it to them then. But at the same time, it would be great to table at something and just, label all of your zines as being free. But, I was talking to a friend of mine who said basically, well, I mean, we all live and, most of us have grown up in a society, this capitalist society. So whether we reject it or embrace it, I mean, it's there, and it's ingrained in us to some point. And if you do give away your zines, there might be a number of people that just assume that that there's no quality there, that it's not worth it, just because like there's not a price tag attached to it. And I hate that that's the case, but that's the case. Some people get it, but I think more times than not, people don't get it. It's too close,
Yeah, I'm definitely back and forth on that conversation. Growing up in punk and like the economy of punk, where like everything is free, charge as little as possible, make sure things are affordable, but then also realizing that everyone who's dictating those rules is living in a really nice house with their parents and like driving a really nice cars. And I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like that was a big turning point for me, like who was telling me that I couldn't charge a certain amount. And so my zines are a little more expensive than I think most zines are normally. I just taken into account all the creative labor. And yeah, I do trade and I do give away zines fairly often if we communicate about it. It's all about communication, I think, in the zine economy. We talk about like, hey, if you can't afford it, I got you. I give you a discount, whatever. Or like, hit me up, trade me. But I am no longer ashamed to like charge money for my zines like I was when I first started out.
Yeah, I don't fault anyone for charging whatever they charge for their zines. I mean, it's everything. Unfortunately, things take money to travel, to print things. Anything you want to do to a zine, it's sometimes it takes a lot of money to do so. If you want it, do it that way. So yeah, I mean, it's especially nowadays, like everybody's looking, a lot of people aren't working, and they're still trying to survive and still create work. So I'm lucky that I have a job that I could still support artists and promote their work and share their work too. So yeah, I don't have any qualms about whatever people charge for their work.
Yeah, I think we're at a pretty awkward time with like, I guess what Julia was calling punk economics or whatever, where it's kind of like a little outdated, like the like $5 show or whatever it just doesn't line up with the cost of making things or traveling or producing anything in 2020. But there's still like, it's interesting because like now I make pottery and I have no problem charging for it. With zines, it was never about money at all. It was just about like what really matters, like connecting with people and like expression. And I also like stole most of my copies and like, I don't know, like it just was a completely different way of operating. But like, I don't know, it's just a really confusing time because like I was actually thinking about making another issue of Shotgun like maybe a couple years ago. And I asked somebody to contribute to it and they asked me to get paid. And I was just like I don't even know. Like, I mean, I was just kind of like, wow, this is a project that I never made a cent. Well, no, that's not true. I have made money from the zine, but it was like not much, never anything that I was like trying to live off of or anything like that. But like, yeah, it was never about money. And everyone was always like willing to just kind of contribute for free. And now I totally understand people saying like I need some type of compensation for my work, but I don't even understand how to fit that into my zine because it doesn't like produce money. And then, like the suggestion was, well, why don't you start generating income? And that's just not something I want to attach to zines at all. So, I mean, I just think there's just two ways to think about it. There's just kind of like wanting to like, for me, zines and punk is like wanting to have like at least one space in your life that's not like wrapped up in capitalism, but like how far can you take that? It's 2020 and everyone's squeezed. So.
I remember, this is a few years back. I remember being at an airport. I think I was probably headed to some state for a zine fest. And I met this guy and we had this conversation about writing, and I explained zines to him. And towards the end of the conversation, he was kind of like, so you pretty successful with it? And I'm like, I mean, I'm happy with where I am. I don't know if anyone's really successful per se with zines. And he's like, well, I mean, if you weren't making money on it, then if it weren't profitable, then why would you still be doing it? And the conversation kind of ended right there. Personally, like I mean, some people are in it for the money, but I can't really understand being in the zine specifically to for income. If anyone can actually do it, great for them. But I always saw it as just more for, kind of like where the actual money is just like a little tip or something, you know, and people are as excited to share their zine as the person is to read it. And it's not necessarily about a zine as like a commodity, you know?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like you mentioned, the guy said, so are you successful? Like, what does it mean to be successful in the zine world? Like, to me, it just means like some people read my zines and liked it.
Yeah, I do. I feel like there was a moment in zine culture when there was like the zine celebrity, right? And I feel like Aaron Comet Bus for me was one of those people. I pilgrimaged to meet that person several times in New York. Just wanted to meet Aaron. And even Julia F. Like, I feel like Julia F. has crafted this persona and this distro that is really super interesting and super unique. But the economy and the culture of zines is definitely in flux, right? And especially as like comics are entering the zine sphere, there's a different vibe. You know, people are standing up. They're like wearing button-down shirts. They're and that's cool. I love hustle. I love to hustle. All right, I like it. But also, it's really interesting when it turns into something more like almost. It feels academic or corporate. It feels different. It just feels different. I don't know how to explain it, but it's there now, and it's interesting. It's really interesting. We do have some questions though. Oh, go ahead, Liz. You were about to say something.
Nah, you know, no one needs to hear what I have to say. But that's,
No.
I was just gonna say, like, so now I know a number of you. So Oscar, Jonas, Julia, you have all been Chicago Zine Fest organizers at some point, right? Or Jonas, now you're just Midwest Perzine
Just
Fest.
Midwest Perzine Fest, yeah.
But you're like an honorary Chicago Zine Fest organizer, sort of.
Okay,
Kind of.
all right, sure.
But so you all have experience with like organizing a zine fest, and thank you, by the way, for your service, because I can't stand organizing events, and I'm so glad that other people do it. And I'm happy to table at them, but I don't want to organize it, so thank you. But talking to people who organize CAKE, so Chicago Alternative Comics Expo, it's like with CAKE, like it's a whole like juried thing, and you know, I know it's a little bit looser with Chicago Zine Fest, you know, and it is like definitely like a different vibe. I don't know if any of you want to weigh in on that. But let's go to the questions, if you know.
I mean, definitely, like the questions are asking about Chicago, like Chicago zine scene. But I do know that CAKE, from what I understand, has a budget to work off of.
Yeah.
Chicago Zine Fest does as well, but it's not to the extent that CAKE does. Like CAKE brings in international cartoonists and comics people. But I think like the production budget is so different between the two events.
Yeah, I'm not sure about CAKE's budget, but I know that they definitely do a lot of fundraisers. They have really good fundraisers, and so many great comic artists donate their work for it. So I think that really helps with their budget raising. I'm sure they get grants too and stuff like that. But I'm amazed by both fests, like just the amount of workshops and presentations. And yeah, CAKE has brought in so many of my favorite artists over the years. It's pretty amazing, like who they're able to bring in there for these events. Yeah.
But in my opinion, all the hotties are at Chicago Zine Fest. Like,
Agreed.
I was like, did someone say questions? So as promised, it's I'm back. So, well, I feel like Julia, you can start off with this one. I had chatted to me if anyone has a best memory from a Zine Fest or Zine Fest after party.
I can't remember, right? Like, I can't remember. But I mean,
Really good party.
yeah, it was always a good time. You know, it was when I was younger, more so than now, because now I can barely hold my alcohol. But but like there were dance parties. Chicago Zine Fest had dance parties afterwards. I don't know whose house I was staying at, but I was staying at somebody's house. It was good. I'm sure there are better stories than mine.
I definitely have one. I met Ian Mackay at the frontman of Fugazi and also in Minor Threat. I met him at a DC Zine Fest, and it was just, I mean, I had kind of, I don't want to say idolized him before, but yeah, never mind. But it was kind of funny because the guy next to me, yeah, he gets up to go to the bathroom, and like before even like a minute, he comes racing back, and he's all freaking out, and you know, the person next to him is like, oh, he saw somebody famous or something like that, and I'm just like, oh, who cares, whatever, I'm just a celebrity. And then they said his name, and I just started freaking out exactly like that guy, just like, do I talk, do I you know. And I finally was able to go over and chat with him for a couple minutes. But yeah, that was quite a moment for me that I won't forget. So
You had a quick story about this is the LA Art Book Fair, because I've been going there the last 5 or 6 years. And one of my favorite artists is Neckface. He was a graffiti artist from California and New York. And a vendor had one of his books that was out of print for 10 years. And I couldn't believe he had it. And he's like, oh, I designed it. I'm just selling my personal copies. So I bought it. And 5 minutes later, I run into Neckface at the fest. And I was just like, my mind was blown. And he very nicely drew something in the book. He was really funny. So it's just like, yeah, it's just nice to get to meet your favorite artists and still be able to interact with them and talk to them and purchase their books. You know, zines are so much more affordable than buying like a painting or something. So at least you get to own something that they've created and is still affordable, you know. So yeah.
Yeah, so Oscar, I feel like that's a good segue into this other question, because you're talking about how you had a chance to meet somebody you're a fan of, kind of give them feedback, interact with them. So we had a question of, do you have consistent readers or fans of any of your zines or your work? And do you get feedback from them or have a chance to interact with them at all?
Okay, I have people that are basically pen pals because they're zinesters, and because they do Perzines and because I do Perzines, we send each other our zines, and it's like, you know, it's the Liz News, essentially. I mean, that's not the name of my zine, but that's what it is, you know, and like, which is funny because I used to make fun of my dad for doing like our annual newsletter about the family, and now looking back, I'm like, oh, my dad was doing a zine, you know, but like other zinesters who are fans, but I'm a fan of theirs, and we're also a fan of trading. And so much of my experience of what I enjoy about zines is being immersed in the culture.
yeah, same. It's like I have a good number of people that have read my work, but I always hesitate to use the word fan because ideally what would end up happening is, yeah, they would write me a letter, I'd write them back, and we'd become friends, you know, just because they might have started by reading something of mine that they felt really strongly about, but not in a shallow sense of like, oh, I think you're a really good writer, which that's not something I've cared about for a while, you know? Like, I've always kind of thought that if somebody really connected with a work of mine, or if the emotion in it inspired them to make their own zine that might even be better than mine, like that's worth way more than someone just saying, you know, I'm a fan, I really like your writing, I really like your zines. I mean, which, you know, they like it, they move on to something else, and then they like that, and they move on to something else, you know? Forming that bond with them is way, way more important, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of people who are watching this conversation right now who I've met through zines, and it's not a fan thing. We just talk, we connect over the medium somehow. And like the process, and just, we're both doing this totally, it feels absurd to be making zines, quite honestly. And there's something about zine makers that it's a camaraderie unlike any other I have experienced. And I'm super grateful for that.
I produce photo zines and under a Fotoflow Press, but I also when I find a zine that I really like, I just contact the maker, and sometimes I'll buy like 10 copies wholesale just because I want to share it with people in Chicago. And half the time I give this stuff away too, because I just want people to have these zines. But yeah, when I sell stuff on my table, it's by other people. It's because I really love what it is, and I've reached out to them. So I've met so many great artists that way. And then I'm really happy when a stranger comes to my table and they're like, "Oh, I saw this in Arkansas," or whatever, and they couldn't believe that I had that zine here in Chicago. That happened last week with some Arkansas zines. And it was just, I'm happy that they're happy and that they're connecting with these people. So there's definitely people that are fans of specific zines. I met a DJ in Chicago a couple of years ago who's just visiting from Texas, and he's like, "Oh, I make a zine," and he tells me the name of it, and it was one about train graffiti, and I'm like, "I have that zine," and he couldn't believe that I even had it, and I was just gushing over his zine and how like beautifully made it was. So yeah, there's always like mutual admiration, or just, you know, I'm a fan of like really well designed and like really great content. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of people that are gushing over each other's work.
Yeah, I agree. The word fan doesn't really fit because there is such camaraderie. Like, one person I can think of right now, I mean, you know, I'm friends with like so many people who like we met through bands and zines, because for me that was it was combined. Like I was touring in bands and like distributing my zine that way. So the people that I know through my zine, I also know through music, and there's tons of that. But one person I think of in particular is a friend of mine who I'm still in touch with. We've probably been in touch through the mail forever. And we like started to hang out in person like maybe about like 5 years ago. But he was like this random white guy who made a zine who lived in like Honolulu, and now he lives in Portland. And we just became such good friends because we realized that we had like such a similar take on like what punk was to us. It wasn't just like this like formula. It was kind of like this like free space to like do whatever you want kind of. I don't know, like we really love a lot of the same music, and like, you know, outside of punk, like certain kinds of like spiritual jazz and free jazz, and like, I don't know, just we connected on so many different levels. So it's just like so much more about just finding kindred spirits, you know, than like fans, you know.
Definitely. And I think there's a question that I think kind of segues from this to the sort of connecting and all that kind of stuff that you guys are talking about. Someone was wondering if you all are kind of seeing spaces online or kind of like virtual spaces that offer some or any of the same things that you find in, you know, kind of zine culture and zine festivals and things like that, or it's really something that maybe you've only found captured in these in-person ways.
I kind of feel like podcasts can be zine-like, maybe not as much, but I don't know. A few years ago, I would listen to some podcasts that were like really, really like lo-fi and like didn't have a lot of subscribers, and it was just like two young like queers or like, you know, just talking about like the most random thing together, and it felt very zine-like to me. Just like, oh, like anyone can do this. It doesn't have to be like high quality. There doesn't have to be commercials. I don't know. I haven't been hearing as many that feel like that to me. And also I have to admit that like, it didn't make me feel like I could like contact them in the same way that zines did. But there was just something so like lo-fi and intimate about it that it kind of, and just that freedom of it can be about anything. It can be any format. That kind of reminded me of like what zines can be.
I'm interested in, you know, the way people are doing Zine Fest during the pandemic. You know, like hashtag whatever Zine Fest 2020. And then they'll have like a post about their zines and how to get them or whatever. And, you know, I suppose it's better than nothing, but it feels hollow.
Yeah.
But then it is sort of beautiful that people are connecting. You know, maybe somebody's participating with merely a hashtag, so they might not necessarily have been at the Zine Fest in whatever other city, state, country, or whatever, so at least there's that. But I guess it's better. It's the best that can happen right now, and I can appreciate that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm personally not that into it, but I mean, it's the resource that we have. And I mean, I guess that's at the core, that's kind of what zines are about. It's, I mean, from when I started, where it was like, you find a copier and you go for it. That's the resource that you have. If you have a typewriter, do that. If you have, like, I don't know, your dad's really bad computer, let's like a Commodore 64, you still, if you can print it out or you can type it up, go for it, but yeah, I don't know, something about just the sort of, when it's online, it feels kind of distant. I can't personally feel that sort of connection to it, that bond with the material.
I know.
I would say though, oh, I'm sorry, Julia, go ahead.
No, I mean, okay, Anastasia in the chat from Houston Zine Fest mentioned that they're using Twitch for like a 6-hour-long broadcast. And I do think that Twitch and these like DIY broadcasting platforms are super interesting right now. And my favorite part about all that is like the active chat. Like you can go off in the chat and just make friends in the chat and be totally ridiculous. And going back to what April said about troll culture sort of starting, zine culture is really interesting to think about. But also I do see people using Instagram stories, like the succession of posts, in a really narrative way. I think Meanwhile Chicago does it really well. They tell a story in the movement of their posts. And I'm seeing everyone sort of post in my circle a succession of like narrative posts in just a really beautiful way. That's where I'm at with that.
Just during the beginning of the pandemic, I mean, it was, everyone's like hunkered home at home, and all the fests were canceled. It was really depressing to me, just that I thought, wow, we're not going to be able to get out and go see art or zine fests for a while. So I remember in the spring, like again, LA Art Book Fair, and my friend Peter in Denver, he started the Quarantine Fest hashtag, and it's made this really great guideline, like this is what we should try. And there's probably like 3,000 or 5,000 images on Instagram with that hashtag now. And it was just focused on one weekend, and it was just at least a way for people to share their work, sell their work. And I mean, it really is better than nothing, better than just sitting at home and not sharing your work at all. So yeah, I mean, still, like you said, it feels hollow, but at the same time, some people need to make some money, and some people just want to share what they've made, or they're sitting in all these zines that they were stockpiling ready for the spring for all the zine fests, because it always feels like May and June is like when all the fests are happening. So I know just a lot of people are stuck. So I'm all for the hashtags. I've discovered so many zines from other countries that I would have seen if it wasn't for that hashtag. We did one for ZINEMercado, but I know other fests around the country have been doing the same idea too. So, and it's fun because you could still go back and see what was out there too.
Cool. I had a question about, I feel like it's kind of related to some of the things you guys were talking before, like what is a zine for you guys, sort of the commodification or definition, if that stuff really matters, and where like the boundaries. So the question is sort of about like, is there a place where like a zine becomes an artist publication? I think this is particularly from sort of like a library or an institutional like collecting standpoint, or just sort of distinction. Is it like production value? Is it the quality of the material? Is it the regularity of publication? Is if it becomes rare? And if, do those things matter? Does it matter if something's sort of designated as a zine or an artist publication? And is there, what you guys sort of thinks about the pros and cons of having zines sort of be in special collections or have an institutional presence in museums or archives or these types of places?
Coming from a library background, I'm always excited to see institutions collect work, because you see an archive, some cool, like whatever, a book from the 50s, and then you realize, oh, some librarian had to decide to collect that and add it to the collection. And then you think, are people doing that now? Are they actively looking for things to add? And sometimes they're not, and sometimes they are. Well, I know Liz can speak about this, but like Sarah Wenzel, a librarian at the University of Chicago, she's been collecting, I don't know, thousands of zines related to Chicago artists. And it's such a great measure of support. Because I know like a reference book at a university library can cost $200, $300. With that amount of money, you can buy, you know, 10, 20 zines and, you know, vastly improve the collection, or at least expand the collection with work by POC and just all types of people. I've always been happy that I'd see Liz at the Chicago Zine Fest every year with a whole list of zines that Sarah had provided her with to go around and purchase at the tables on behalf of the University of Chicago. So to me, that was really impressive. And I was just really happy to see that. And just meeting people from other archives like at SEIC, Derek at DePaul, and of course in other cities too. I think it's, you know, because we're all gonna die. It's at least a little piece of you is like saved somewhere in the, you know, in a collection somewhere.
It's funny, in order for us to find things on the floor at Quimby's, we have to classify it so we can find it. And because we have to pay, once someone has consigned something, if it sells, and they come and pick up the payment, we have to pay them. So we have to be able to find the zines to make sure they're there. And if somebody places a mail order for it off our website, then, you know, we got to find the thing. And we have so much stuff that if we don't classify it in some way, we're just never going to be able to find it. And I have heard people come in and complain before, you know, like, you know, that somehow that is we're the man if we have to classify a zine. I do feel like only because, so the original question was, or part of the original question was, you know, at what point does a zine become an artist booklet? In my mind, it's when the retail price is over $25. And I'll tell you why I say that. And that is because that is the cutoff point that which we will accept something to be on consignment. Because if it's over that price, then like if it falls apart on the floor or if it gets stolen or whatever, and then we have to pay this person for that, you know, you know, like if somebody wants to sell something that's a little bit more expensive than that, we have a different discussion together, you know. And so that in some ways that is slightly arbitrary of a definition for artist booklet, but merely because that's our, you know, cutoff point. So.
Yeah, and I think kind of a related question just came through on the chat too about if local libraries new to starting like collecting, how, like, what's the best way to find local zines or sort of how to go about doing that?
Well, I guess I'll jump. I don't mean to hog the, you know, the conch shell, I guess. But we do have like a local section at the store too, and so we do actually fulfill regular orders for libraries and educational institutions. Like just this week, I put together some orders for the Tufts Library, MSU, University of Chicago. You know, so we can kind of help with that too. I mean, there are other places, of course, too. You know, there are other stores in Chicago that carry zines too, like Uncharted, Women and Children First. You know, so there's places to go.
Yeah,
I would also just, oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. Just when I've gone to other cities, I've always looked for like Quimby's equivalent, and I quickly realized that Quimby's is pretty much the biggest zine store in the country, as far as I can tell. And the only ones that I found that were similar were like Needles and Pens in San Francisco, and Desert Island, the comic book store in New York. And then I found out that both of them, the owners had lived in Chicago, and they were influenced by Quimby's too. So Quimby's is sort of like spreading all these little baby Quimby's around the country. so yeah, I mean, I'm sure, libraries can contact, like, there's some zine distros that still exist. Like Billy the Bunny, I don't know if he still does it, but he used to have a big zine distro. Yeah, he doesn't do that anymore. But yeah, I mean, Quimby's, I feel, is still one of the best sources for library to reach out to find out what's happening in the zine world. Because people send work from other parts of the country, right, for the store.
Yeah, and what's really been nice is we've started getting stuff, and we've always had some stuff from all over the world, but lately we've been sort of prolifically getting more stuff from all over the world, which is so delightful to see.
One thing is funny for me too is after Cake or Chicago Zine Fest, suddenly I'll see Quimby's is just crammed with lots of new work from all the exhibitors that just wanted to leave their work in Chicago rather than take it back with them. So that's another way to catch up with stuff you missed at the fest, is just going to the store a few days later.
Yeah, the Monday after Cake or Zine Fest it's like an after party in there. Although not for the people working.
I mean, I think that's very helpful thinking about a focus. If you're looking for zines, like Latinx zines, zines about DIY healthcare, that would be a good starting point, trying to figure out if there's going to be a focus for the collection or not. Because I do know a lot of zinesters who don't have work at Quimby's. And so maybe doing an outside search might be just as fruitful for a specific inquiry. And just a side note, like, I do remember there weren't always archivists and librarians coming around Zine Fest buying up work. As much as I love librarians and archivists, what seemed to happen for me was that the moment the institutions started to move in and collect the work, not saying I don't support that, I do, but also the amount of like really countercultural work decreased. Like, I was able to get herbal abortion zines. I was able to get like wild call out zines of like white supremacist people, and they had pictures of their profiles. It was some really radical things going on, and there still are, but I'm seeing less and less of that being so visible. And I don't know if it's a result of zines being more visible or not. It's just something I think about a lot.
Just another side note for librarians looking for work to purchase. I found that, people use hashtags effectively on Instagram, and like if I'm looking for graffiti zines, I'll just look for that at 2 in the morning, and I'm like, I'll just order this random zine from somebody. And I purchased a lot of zines at 2 in the morning, and then weeks later, I'm like, when did I order this? But it's fun. I mean, it's another way. I mean, it's this kind of sign of the times. Like, Instagram is this one thing that a lot of people are on selling their work. And again, you'll find work on there that's not, you're not going to find it anywhere else. So it's just another source for people to share what they're making.
Awesome. We had a question specifically for Osa. Someone wanted to know if you could talk a little bit about the evolution of creating shotgun seamstress, and if there would ever possibly be another issue ever in the future. You're muted.
I don't use Zoom a lot, you guys. Bear with me. Okay, the evolution. Well, for the first issue, I didn't even call it the first issue because I didn't know if there was going to be more or not. So I feel like every issue just came on its own in this strange way. And like I was talking about, it was really linked with me touring in bands and meeting people. And that's kind of how I stayed finding like new people to interview. And that's why it would take like a year to produce an issue, because it was like a process of like traveling around, getting inspired, meeting people, or meeting someone who would tell me to, like, okay, for instance, I was in a band called New Bloods, and we were able to tour, and we played a show with Vaginal Davis in Berlin. And she's the one who told me to interview Alvin Baltrop, the photographer from New York. And so, that's pretty much how the zine worked. And I feel like now that I don't tour, there's a lot less inspiration for the zine. Yeah, I don't know. Every now and then I kind of feel like I want to do another one, but I'm in just such a different point in my life where like I'm not touring as much, I'm not meeting new people quite as much, or like at least not like a bunch of punks anymore. So like, yeah, I kind of feel like the time has passed for it, but I don't know. I still sometimes make like little like quarter issues of just random zines here and there, but I tend not to, I don't know, I don't like distro as hard as I used to. Like a lot of the time I'll just send them to friends because I also feel like that's something I kind of, I don't know, like kind of blew past. Like with Shotgun, it was more about, I wanted to get it into like other Black punks' hands. And so I knew that I had to like make a ton and like make them super available. And that just meant that a bunch of white people got them too. And I think that's kind of why it kind of like took on this other life, is because I really wanted to make sure that Black people could get them. And so I like went out of my way to like make them really, really available. And I have no idea how many of each issue has been like made. And I know people contact me and they're like, do you mind if we like copy this and keep it in print? And it's like, well, I'm not going to keep it in print, so please do. So now with zines, for me, it feels like I want to just take it back to the root of it being like 20 copies for friends. You know, there's just something so special and cool about that I feel like I almost never allowed myself to experience, because I was just like, I want to get this to other Black kids. And there was like, in early 2000, there was like one per town, it felt like, you know? So yeah, whenever I do make zines now, it's like this like tiny little intimate thing, and I don't worry about like destroying it and broadcasting it the way that I used to.
Definitely. Very cool. All right, last question for fun. If you could curate a zine fest on a specific topic, what would it be? Or if the thought of curating a zine fest stresses you out, what would you want to attend? Maybe that's also the other side of that question. If you don't want to organize it, what would be a really cool one you'd want to attend?
I mean, I could start. Just as a photographer, like going to Chicago Zine Fest over the years, I'd always look for photo zines and maybe find 3 people selling zines, and I'd be like, oh, I wish there was more photo zines here. And then a couple of years ago, a photographer from Chicago, Adam Jason Cohen, reached out and said he was going to work with the Ace Hotel to create a fest for them, and he wanted to put a lot of photographers. And I said, well, I've always wanted to see an all photography zine fest. So we did that, and he reached out to a lot of contacts around the country, and just amazing group of people showed up. And we made it more of a market too. Like we had people selling prints, but that was like a happy moment for me just to see like an all photography zine fest, because I'd never seen one before. So I feel like at least that got accomplished to make me happy.
I suppose this is a window into the inside of my brain, but if I could attend one that is extremely specific to my tastes, it would be a zine fest that's about personal responses of media criticism and where it intersects with mid-century modern design and candy. Zines about that. I would go to a fest where all the zines were about those topics.
Love it.
I feel like, you know, I've already been to all the type of zine fest that would really appeal to me, because the last one that I was able to go to before the pandemic was the Dear Diary Fest in Berkeley, and it was all Perzines. And well, Liz, you were there too. I absolutely adored it. Just Perzines are my favorite type of zine, and just going to this big event where that's at the forefront. I mean, that's why I wanted to do one here in the Midwest. But yeah, it's my interest all just contained right there. And I can't think of anything that would really get me more excited than something like that. So. Yeah.
Julia, Osa, no?
dancing, if there was dancing and music. I mean, I've already gone, like everyone's saying, we've already gone to these fests. It's like, oh, what could we, like, I can't think of anything.
I mean, am I still muted? I got to curate Olympia Zine Fest one year, and instead of having readings, I just had bands because I like really hate reading my zine for people. It's so much better if you just read it to yourself. And yeah, I don't know. I can't think of like the ideal beyond that.
I mean, that's kind of cool that you all feel like you've already been to your dream, or like, I don't know, that's pretty cool. Or I feel like kind of says a lot about those experiences already, that you can't think of something better, you know what I mean? Like something that excites you more than the experiences you've had. So that is very cool. Well, we are closing in on our time, and I just wanted to share on the screen for everybody some ways that you can support all of our amazing participants this evening. And I just want to thank Liz and Jonas and Julia and Oscar and Osa so much, and the Invisible April as well, for being amazing and sharing with you guys and having a great conversation this evening. So everyone will receive a follow-up email if you attended this with all of these links on how to support our panelists, as well as links to the other Chicago Collections zines. So thank you again so much for joining, and I hope everyone has a wonderful night.